Hello. Oh, sorry. Hi. Hello and welcome to Track 1, Strengthening Your Care and Support Team, which is sponsored by Horizon Pharma. My name is Anne-Marie Bingo, and I'm excited to be hosting for this morning breakout Track 1 sessions. As a reminder, this track is being live streamed, and I would like to welcome our remote attendees as well as remind everyone that we have a mobile app available, so be sure and download it and use some of our highlighted features like the live Q&A. This next session is Beyond Diagnosis, Working with a Genetic Counselor During Your Rare Disease Journey, presented by Allison Gatch, Genetic Counselor at Ann and Robert Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago, and Melissa Brobach, patient and advocate. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Okay, here we go. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this track. We're excited to talk with you about the role of genetic counselors in healthcare, and we're really hoping for this to be more of an interactive discussion, so we have some opportunities where we like to hear from you, and please feel free to ask questions at any point in time. We have no disclosures, sadly. So we'd like to get to know who we have in the audience. So just a quick show of hands. Has anyone here ever worked with a genetic counselor, either for your own health care or for a family member or a friend? Great. Or any genetic counselors in the audience? Okay. And for those of you who have worked with a genetic counselor, I just hoping to see how often you interact with them. So do you keep in touch with them? How many people maybe talk with them on the phone, see them at appointments, email them? Anybody? Okay. Maybe more of you will after this. How many of you haven't talked with your genetic counselor since your diagnosis or your family member or friends? Okay. And how many of you would be comfortable reaching out to them if you had questions, even if you haven't been talking with them? I'm hoping every single hand will be up at the end. Okay, so the goals of our session today would be just to further explore the roles of the genetic counselor, specifically beyond what happens when you get a diagnosis, because the relationship does not need to end there. And we'd also hope that you will also understand the importance of self-advocacy. And there's a picture of me and Melissa from about a year ago, where we were on a different stage at a different conference, and Melissa was sharing her story, and we were awarded the 2016 Code Talker Award, which, thank you. And so we're going to be sharing a little bit about that opportunity, so if anybody has a fantastic genetic counselor that they've worked with and they would like to share their story, you can nominate them for 2018, and we have a link at the end. So who are genetic counselors? It's a great question. Genetic counselors are professionals. They have a specialized education, so a graduate degree in both human genetics and counseling. And they help patients who need to make decisions about their genetic health as well as to guide their healthcare moving forward. And currently we have about 4,000 certified genetic counselors, which is not enough. We need more. Most genetic counselors are in the clinical setting, working either in a hospital or an outpatient center, but we do have genetic counselors who work in policy, research, and labs. And most genetic counselors who are in a clinical setting have a specific area of interest or care, but there are general providers as well. And so I'm a pediatric genetic counselor, so a lot of what I discuss today will be more focused on the role of the pediatric or adult genetic counselor. What do we do? This is a little obvious, and we're going to get to the less obvious, but we help you understand your genetic risks based on your family history. We help you understand your risk to develop certain diseases or cancer. Is genetic testing appropriate? Who's the right person to test? And what do those results mean for you and your family? We also can provide that emotional support that comes along with this, because a lot of emotions come up when you're reviewing your family history, thinking about health in the family, your own personal risks, and how things may change. The appointment with your genetic counselor may involve discussing family history, discussing why you were referred. A lot of people show up to see me, and I ask them this question, and they're like, I don't know, my doctor sent me here. So really exploring what is the benefit of seeing a genetic counselor, how can we help you, and what are you hoping to get out of the appointment? I'm not there to tell you what to do. I'm there to work with you to help accomplish your goals. We can discuss testing options with you, what those may show, and then provide guidance for choosing appropriate testing. And sometimes the appropriate thing to do is to order no testing, and that's okay. And then, of course, the emotional support aspect of this, somebody who can understand how that genetics might interplay with a lot of other factors of life. So when you get a genetic test result, there are a couple of possibilities. Again, that's not what we're here to discuss. We're going to be focusing on this positive diagnosis. So what happens once we've solved the puzzle? Because the journey is not over at that point. And the whole goal here is to show you, for those of you who raised your hands and said you have not had a conversation with your genetic counselor since diagnosis, or maybe those of you who haven't ever interacted with a genetic counselor, that we're a person on your healthcare team that can hopefully help you achieve what you're looking for with your disease management in many facets of life. So the obvious things that we can help with once we find a diagnosis would be the medical components. So prognosis, what can you expect moving forward? Management, are there screenings, are there medications, devices, surgeries, things that you may want to investigate and learn more about that could improve your health or that you may be expecting to have in the future? We can help educate your care team, because not all healthcare providers or members of your therapy teams understand every little detail of genetics. And that's fine, and that's why we're here to help break things down and make that information more understandable and relatable to the component that they're contributing to your care. We can also educate your primary care physicians, because again, genetics can sometimes not be an easy thing to grasp for everyone, especially with rare diseases. These are things that most healthcare providers never heard of in school. I didn't hear of in school. And then we can also help document things. So whether that's giving you a results letter so that you have a clear understanding of what your diagnosis is. It's also making that very clear in your medical record so that all of your other care members see that, and if you show up in the emergency room, it's there, so that it's just very well defined within the medical record. And then the other thing is documenting an emergency plan. We can work with your care team to come up with a one-pager for what to do in an emergency situation, who to call, what's the key thing to know, and then you can keep that in your purse, your wallet, somewhere on you, and in your medical record as well. We can also help with the ongoing management recommendations, so you can work with your genetic counselor to say what's new in the literature, and is there anything that we should be doing differently based on what we're learning, because this field is moving so fast. And then the last thing on the medical list, which again, not all inclusive, but would be to provide that age-appropriate education. So if this is for a child or teenager, making sure that they understand different components of their condition and what that means for them, but at an appropriate level. We also help in the family arena, specifically family planning. Genetics doesn't just affect one person, it affects the family, and it could affect future generations as well. So your genetic counselor is someone that you can speak with about your family planning options. So if you're concerned about what the risk is to your future children or your siblings' future children or your cousins, anyone in the family, we're there to discuss what that risk is and what your options are and connect you with the appropriate people. So if someone is interested in pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, who do they go see? How do we make sure that they're using a laboratory that can do the testing they're hoping to do? As well as connecting with reproductive geneticists or maternal fetal medicine doctors for prenatal testing, or developing a plan for what do we do when the baby's born and we want to figure out are they affected or not. We also discuss alternative family planning options, so it may be appropriate to talk about using a gamete donor, so Do you want to find a sperm or egg donor? Or do you want to consider adoption? And can we connect you with appropriate resources for that? And of course, identify anyone else at the family who might be at risk. So helping you reach out to family members who potentially could have the same diagnosis or be at risk to be a carrier of that, or just to help them understand your diagnosis. Those were the two traditional models that most people think of when they think of a genetic counselor and how they can help moving forward. But we can also help in many other areas. And one is with connection. And you're all here today, which means that you're connected and you're looking for relationships and you want to learn more and further our knowledge about rare diseases and advocacy for these diseases. And so one of my favorite parts of my job is helping connect families, because you can feel very lost after a diagnosis. And that might be internal connections. So the hospital that I work at provides something called Parentwise and Peerwise, where we can connect families with other families who have gone through training who can help support them during a difficult time, whether that's a diagnosis, an upcoming surgery, or some new health issue that they are not familiar with. And while that person may not have the same disease, or their child may not have the same disease, maybe they've done a similar plan, or they've had a similar experience where they can relate on some level. That's not always an option for families. Sometimes they don't want to meet other people or talk to them on the phone. Maybe they want to explore the internet first. And so that's why I always send families home with a list of support organizations, whether they're specific to that condition or more general for rare diseases. And then I hope that those families will reach out and try to connect. And I know you are all doing that, so I'm very happy to hear that. And then, of course, opportunities. So I'm often bringing up opportunities to families like Make-A-Wish. If you have a chronic condition, you can qualify for that. Or even summer camps that would be appropriate to send your child to, that you know they can get the care they need and you don't have to worry as much, because I know you're going to worry. And then, of course, scholarships. There are a lot of organizations that are represented here today that provide scholarships for children, whether it's for college or for just another opportunity that they can do. We can also help you advocate for yourself. I write so many school letters. I write 7 to 8 a week. This is my most common request from families, because schools just don't always understand or have enough information about a diagnosis, and they're just hoping to learn more that's in a language they can easily process, and they want to know, what does this specifically mean for this child? So I'm constantly writing letters so that families know how to talk to the school about this, and the school has some documentation in place about their child's diagnosis. Let's see. This can be helpful for your IEP process, for getting disability services, especially in college, as well as developing emergency plans. So what does a school nurse need to know? Activity restrictions, so what can you and can you not do in gym class, as well as sports. Dietary changes, do we need to keep special formulas or foods, snacks available for the child or adult? Scholarship opportunities, and then absences. I have a lot of families who say, the school is upset that my child has missed this many days. Can you provide us with additional documentation just saying why this is so beneficial and why they need to be receiving health care? I also help advocate in insurance, not just for genetic testing. Genetic counselors can help with other types of insurance issues. I've written letters for speech therapy just to show an insurance company that a genetic disorder does affect speech and that speech therapy helps improve the speech process, as well as for medications that they may not want to approve. So don't be afraid to reach out and say, would you be willing to help with this, or at least connect me with someone who can if they're uncomfortable doing that. And then the last thing is legal. I fill out FMLA paperwork. I write documents for legal courts. I've talked on the phone with judges, and a lot of judges are okay with speaking with a genetic counselor. It doesn't necessarily have to be a physician because they're just hoping to learn more about the condition in general terms. Referrals. Genetic counselors can help you find other specialists. We're not all experts in these conditions. Rare diseases are rare, and sometimes there is that one provider in the world or one center in the country where you may want your child to be seen, and we can help connect you with them, or we can help form a care team at your home institution with all of the providers that you need. And then, of course, referring to things you might not think of right away, like social work and psychology and psychiatry, and just getting that mental health support that everyone in the family needs. And the last thing would be research. Are there clinical trials available? I'm constantly on clinicaltrials.gov and trying to connect families with researchers, as well as natural history studies, registries, with a lot of support groups, as I hope you all know, do biobanks and registries in natural history studies, so that's a great place to start. And then publications. If I have a motivated family with a rare condition, I am happy to put together a poster, an abstract, a case report, something to get that information out there in the literature, because we need this. We can't just have databases of genetic variants. We need more information about what does this look like, how does this affect someone's life, and what are you doing to treat it? And that's one of the ways that we can, on a case-by-case basis, get that information out there. So your relationships with your genetic counselors are obviously very different. Some of you seem like you're still talking with your genetic counselors. Maybe you see them at doctor appointments because they're part of your care team. I have a lot of families that I speak with regularly because I am their main point of contact, their care coordinator, and I just do that because they have a rare disorder or a genetic disorder and we treat it. But then I have families where once we give the diagnosis, I don't hear from them again. And I tell them, please reach out to me with questions. Please call me, please email me when you read something on the internet and you don't know what it means or you're confused about it. We will do our best, me and my fellow colleagues and our geneticists, to try to figure it out. And so the last point on here is to ask for updates. And this came up earlier in the sequencing talk about what happens when a genetic variant is changed. And I know if any of you were there, you heard about this and how it is an issue where we don't know how to get that information out there and whose responsibility it is. And so I put that responsibility on my patients because there is no way the laboratories are not updating me. I can't possibly get an update for every single patient I've ever seen. And so I ask my families to reach out to me and say, hey, do you have any more information about that result? Can we reanalyze? What's new in the literature? And that prompts me to go through and sort through everything we have and try to get more information. Main point, don't hesitate to ask questions. By a show of hands, is anybody thinking they might reach out to their genetic counselor now who hasn't talked to them in a while? A couple of you? Yay. Okay. Yes.
I'm sorry, I know it's important to be mic'd. Genetic counselors are so overwhelmed and busy. There's so many things. There's such a shortage of genetic counselors today. So, it's wonderful that you do all these things, but you're doing all these things, so it's sometimes difficult to get it done. I love it when a genetic counselor will call us and vet us and say, you know what, I'm going to refer our patients to you because we can help. The other thing is that in the instance where you have a variant of unknown significance, we can help with the families because we're in the trenches with them and telling the families, get back to your genetic counselors, let them know what's going on. You need to go through follow-up testing. We get through the grief with them, the tears. They don't want to know whether they're a carrier and then have other kids tested. So I think there's an integral role here between what we do and what you do until people start signing up to be a genetic counselor. But what I have heard families say, the resistance, is that they don't know what they don't know. So it's one thing to say, ask questions, but if you don't know what you don't know, that's an issue, that's a challenge.
Absolutely. And I love your comment because this is not a one-sided relationship. We need to bring all of the stakeholders together. And so I often feel like, yes, I'm extremely overwhelmed at work. I'm very busy because there is a huge shortage in genetics providers. But oftentimes it'll take me 2 minutes to make a connection. A family has a question, I don't know the answer, or they're just not sure about where they need to go, and then I can connect them with a support group that I've spoken with, learned about, feel comfortable connecting them with. And so I rely heavily on advocacy organizations. Oh, there's so many questions.
Hello, I work with patients with a structural defect that is probably genetically caused, but we don't know yet. And one of the biggest issues that we are finding is you're rare that you are referring families to support groups or foundations. We have a hard time having any medical providers refer families to us when we can make their job so much easier by educating the families and sending them to genetic counselors. But often our kids are diagnosed prenatally and they're told, don't Google it. Don't look it up online. Don't talk to other parents. You'll get misinformation. So the families come to us. They're completely confused. They don't remember a thing that the doctor said. So my question is, how do we, as nonprofits who work, with these patients one-on-one, build relationships with the genetic counseling community and the obstetricians and everyone who sees these kids at the time of diagnosis to refer them to us? How do we make that happen?
I would reach out to your local office. So usually in major cities, there's a large pediatric genetics department at the hospital. Less so in not large cities, and just building that bridge. We've had a number of advocacy organizations reach directly out to us that I had never heard of, but just sending me an email, sending me information, a phone call, coming in and meeting for coffee for 15 minutes, that's in my head, and now all of those resources are now physically in a file on my computer and in my desk as well. And so when those rare disorders come across and we're meeting families who have them, I try to go back through and find these things and continue to work with those organizations. And depending on what it is, if it's a condition where there is a specialty clinic for it, so if you can find like a multidisciplinary clinic at a hospital or just a provider who's seeing a lot of these patients, that relationship is so important because they're going to be your main source of referral then. And it's harder to get to the ones who don't see as many.
Well, I don't want to speak for too many people in this room, but many of us are the leaders for nonprofits on a global level. We can't possibly meet with every genetic counselor for coffee.
No, absolutely, I understand that.
Is there a way that we can work more one-on-one with the genetic counseling community as a whole? Is that an option,
Yes.
an opportunity that we have?
I would reach out to the National Society of Genetic Counselors.
All right, thank you.
We're still a small community, so we're still, I think, pretty easy to work with because there are only about 4,000 of us. And the National Society of Genetic Counselors is very active. They have an annual conference every year. They have listservs. They have smaller working groups within it that focus on specific issues. And so maybe you would want to work with their prenatal special interest group to help get word out that your organization exists and you can help. And they would love that. We really want to work with advocacy organizations. We do not have a handout, just some websites. But I believe all the slides will be on the app and through the, I think, Anne-Marie, is that correct?
I believe so. All of these are recorded, and then, but reach out to Global Genes, and they'll be able to let you know if the slides are available. You have a question?
I just wanted to make a comment. I'm working with the rare disease where we've got about 100 kids that have been diagnosed, and our experience with our initial genetic counselor at Johns Hopkins was actually pretty good, and they connected us with the support group right away. But when we started to go back for follow-up visits, we were pretty quickly told that we're now the experts in this, and that they now need to learn from us on best practices, which, I mean, you know, left a very sinking feeling in the back of my throat to hear that. And I just, maybe hearing, reaching out to this sort of national collection of genetic counselors with more information on the disorder might be a way to avoid that with other families, because it's a pretty tough pill to swallow to know that there really aren't any other pathways to go down to learn about what's happening.
Unfortunately, we do learn just as much from our families as they can learn from us, but
And so one of the things that we've actually been doing is reaching out to the different testing labs to make sure that they have some basic information about our foundation that we've set up around the globe, so that even beyond the genetic counselors, so the labs actually have can give some directions to people that have diagnosed.
so then are the laboratories providing that information when they send results to the clinician?
Presumably, yeah. I mean, I don't know.
That's a great idea.
I don't know what actually happens on the ground level, but we had a genetic counselor that was involved with initially discovering this disorder, and she's been very active in pushing this out to the 7 or 8 labs around the world that are sort of in charge of doing the sequencing.
And sometimes that's all you need is one genetic counselor who's really interested and likes working with your organization and has a passion for it, because they're going to start talking about it. Chicago, we have probably 120, 130 genetic counselors, and I'm constantly speaking about my specialty clinics, and I get emails all the time asking me, you know, what do you think about this? Can I send this patient to you? What information should I give them until they can get in? All of those things. So get someone on board, and quickly, hopefully, we'll get the information out there to our colleagues.
Hi, I have a couple different questions. We are kind of in a similar boat where our children's conditions are super rare, and I was literally told, oh, Google it, it's the third one down on the thing. So we both have children with the same condition. We finally got to meet here today, so it's nice to be able to connect to somebody in real life whose kid has the same thing. But my question is, once they tell us, well, we're going to learn from you, and then we join those medical research programs. Like I personally joined one at the Mayo Clinic, the University of Iowa, and the University of Chicago. At what point do we hear anything back from that? Or is it like waiting for research, or like what happens with that when you join those research programs?
That's usually dependent on the program. For patients that I see that are enrolled in like a clinical research program where they're getting documentation and they're having tests done, we want all of those records at their appointments. But some studies do not disclose. And so it's important to speak with the study coordinator about the specifics of it. And oftentimes you're not going to learn anything from it because they're not sure what to say.
Yeah, okay. I was curious because we signed up for several and then we just not heard anything at all.
And sometimes those are also a way for scientists to find potential study participants. So oftentimes when you sign up for like a registry, then researchers are able to ask the organization, do you have patients with X, Y, and Z who are enrolled? Would you be able to share with them about my study? And you may be receiving information about those opportunities. I'm not entirely sure on the specific ones that you signed up for, but I try to recommend the registries that directly engage the researchers.
Gotcha. And that we've been able to connect with the lady that originally wrote the first case study on
There you
that.
go.
So that was helpful to like at least reach out to her and ask her questions, and she's kind of been able to explain it to us a little bit better. But I guess we're kind of, all of us are at a loss as to how to move forward when they're learning from us, and where do you go from there,
You found an advocacy organization.
Yes.
And then you teach us, and we teach you, and we work together.
I'm curious about what the best practices are as far as following up with families. I know you said that sometimes people don't come back to you, so you have no control over that, but I'm just wondering what the best practices are. As we discussed earlier, we have a wonderful genetic counselor and a geneticist who have us back every 4 to 6 months. We have, wonderful conversations. We are teaching them. We know more than them already, but they do labs every appointment. We continue to discuss, they care about my son's development, but within our group, there are many families who saw their geneticist once, were never asked to come back, you know? So it's like there's a huge range. Like we consider our geneticist more important than our pediatrician, and then there's other families who never see them again. So is there a standard?
No. It's a institution by institution, so it also has to do with what is feasible. Some geneticists just are not able to follow up because they don't have the time to see that many patients. And I know that's a terrible thing to say, but every hospital has a shortage of geneticists. And so we're trying to come up with solutions to that. At my particular institution, we have hired 4 nurse practitioners who now work hand in hand with our geneticists and our genetic counselors to provide additional care. So you have a geneticist and a nurse practitioner and a genetic counselor and maybe a dietitian, and we all come together, and that allows us more follow-up. Because if we don't have the appointment spaces, we can't do exactly what you're doing. So we need solutions. So please tell us solutions too. Like tell your providers that you want that care. Or go get another opinion. Go see a new doctor. You're always entitled to do that.
I have a question. First off, I want to say I'm from the Chicago area, and Lurie's and their metabolic team is absolutely amazing. I'm the president of the PKU organization.
Oh, so you know Andrea.
Yes, I know her
We've
very
probably met because I go to the PKU conference
yeah,
every year.
And I'll probably see you there this
Yes.
fall. So one thing, so I was seen at Rush for a long time, and I had an amazing genetic counselor, and she left, and then the next person left, and now there's no one. And I highly relied upon that original person. What do you recommend when you don't have a genetic counselor and you don't really feel your geneticist? There's no team approach where at Lurie's
You go to a new institution. But are you speaking from an adult perspective? That's a whole other issue.
Well, I mean, I wasn't diagnosed till I was 10, and so it was Keisha Johnson. I'm sure you know.
I know Keisha.
And she was like a savior. And so I'm looking for even one person to give me some guidance, where right now I feel like there's no guidance. I feel like I'm running the show, and I don't want to run the show. I think it's scary.
Are you able to see Dr. Burton at Lurie?
I was told she doesn't see patients.
Oh, she does see patients.
Well, new patients.
I'll give you my card, and I'll connect you with Andrea, her genetic counselor.
But in general, if your institution doesn't have a genetic counselor, what would you recommend? Just trying to change?
Find a genetic counselor.
Okay. Well, there.
Go to this website and find one and see how they can help you. I take calls from people who are not patients. They've never been to our institution, and they just have general questions. They want to know about a specific disorder, about a specific test, and I'm more than happy to provide that information, but on that general level. And you can always get that and bring it back to your care team if they don't have a genetic counselor, or they don't have someone to fill that role. Take action and learn about these things. But get a second opinion, get a third opinion, get a fourth opinion. It's okay. So I think we're gonna move on to the next half just for time, and we'll have more time for questions at the end. Because Melissa's gonna share her story about what it was like to grow up with an undiagnosed disorder, and then our relationship and how we sort of put the puzzle pieces together and how she's advocated for herself.
Okay, hi everybody. So I'm Melissa, and I was Allison's patient for a little while at Lurie Children's in Chicago. So I want to just kind of talk about my story and how the genetics team played a role in my care, how to self-advocate for yourself or for your child, and then, just you're more than your diagnosis, how to kind of move forward and say, okay, I have this is what I'm going to do to manage it, now what else can I do, where can I go, where can I travel, where can I go play. So I'm just going to kind of go through, my life first. My parents were young and looking forward to starting a family, and in 1991, my mom got pregnant, and they were told that there was something wrong. They couldn't tell you what. I I'm older than Google, so Google wasn't a thing. There was not a lot in terms of the connective tissue disorders. There wasn't a lot of testing, and my gene hadn't been found yet anyway, so science was a little behind. And my mom was given the option to terminate because they just didn't know. They didn't know, what was going to come of that. And because they didn't know, my mom couldn't convince herself that that was an option. And so then I showed up 2 months early just to be at my baby shower. Can't miss a party. And I was relatively healthy otherwise, and they just didn't know what I had, didn't know what the prognosis was, and they told my mom I might never walk, might never talk, and I haven't stopped talking since. So in general, I had a relatively normal childhood. From my perspective, my mom and dad pretty much normalized it and tried to make it seem like it wasn't, catastrophic. And so I, grew up, had the embarrassing Halloween pictures, was in the same bouncer everyone was in, but then in between there, I did have to kind of put the puzzle pieces together, or try to, and there was nothing to explain why all these things were happening. And so I had some spinal fusions and was diagnosed with hydrocephalus. So I had a shunt put in, and those have the highest failure rate of any implant, so that's another story, but had a few surgeries for that to manage that. And carrying on, I did have a relatively normal childhood, still had a few surgeries in there. Before school, I'd go to my pediatrician like everybody else, but then just thought it was normal. You also saw your neurosurgeon, your orthopedic surgeon, and just, had a few more specialties in there. And I did see genetics, and they, ran some tests, tried to diagnose it, and couldn't come up with anything. And so, I just carried on and had no diagnosis, but then, graduated from high school and went to college and moved away from home. And that was actually when I needed to start advocating for myself the most. My freshman year was fine, normal, had no surgeries, it was awesome. And then after my freshman year, my health came to the forefront, and it became more important, and I needed to advocate for myself. I had 4 neurosurgeries, and the second one didn't go as planned. I went in on August 12th, and the next thing I remember was September 5th. My family said goodbye, and that was probably like the most challenging thing that I've went through in my life. And after that, I had a lot of things that came from that I needed to manage and needed to be able to speak up for myself. I needed to do research and be able to talk to doctors and tell them what I wanted. And the genetics team was always very good about presenting any options and any tests that could be there for me to help manage my care. In between there, I got a little sassy. I had my teenage years, and I stopped going to genetics. I felt like I was like a science experiment. They would do all these tests, and nothing would come from it, and I just wanted to go hang out with my friends, and so it got to the point where I just decided that I would stop going, but luckily they kind of followed me through my my cardiology doctors, and so they still kind of kept up with my care. And this was, key, because the one day I was at my cardiology appointment, and genetics came in, and this was after all of the surgeries I had, and I had nerve damage in my leg that was undiagnosed, and out of all the fusions I had, it was the worst pain I've ever felt in my life, and nobody could figure out why, and so I was in for a regular cardiology appointment and genetics came in and realized how bad it had gotten, and they kind of said, okay, you need to speak up, you need to talk for yourself, tell them what's going on. And that, got me the help I needed. I was admitted that day, and they took care of it. And it's things like that genetic counselors can, they'll help you with your genetic things and can do testing, but they can also just sit down with you and be a friend and teach you how to advocate for yourself for kind of the all-encompassing health issues that you have. And so in this time period, I had a couple things that they, especially after they taught me to advocate for myself, it was key because, one morning I woke up and my right arm wasn't working. I couldn't lift it up past my hip and had no idea why. And I think that was you saw me in that one. It happened again that I was at my cardiology appointment, and I was so frustrated that I could not move my arm, and nobody was helping me, and I just hadn't figured out how to advocate for myself there, and totally lost it at the cardiology appointment. And Allison helped with the other doctors to kind of get me in a place where I was able to talk to other doctors again and figure out what's going on. Had a shoulder surgery, and now I can do this again, which is great. I don't take for granted that I can put my hair in a ponytail anymore, because that was frustrating. Definitely lots of self-advocating as I grew up and learned to kind of speak for myself. And then I guess the exciting part now, this is, I think, the more fun part. So after college, I started adulting. I got a job and did all that. And I was at another cardiology appointment. I still was being a little hesitant with genetics, and I still hadn't made an appointment. It was going on probably 10 years. But Allison popped in, and it was different, and she had more stuff with her, and she said, we found it, you have a diagnosis. And it was like, hold on, what did you say? And they had found, after doing whole exome sequencing, figured out what I had. The gene had just been discovered a couple years back, so it was just science. I was a little bit behind on that. And that was amazing. Time stops, and my cardiology appointment went to a 2-hour session of oh my gosh, okay, tell me. And with her helping me advocate, I was ready to say, okay, tell me the name, what's the information. And as the genetic counselor, she had all 2 medical journals that were out there at the time, and had resources ready for me to, kind of figure out, okay, now I have this diagnosis, now what? And so now I'm, living with that, and on top of that, managing just transitioning to adult care and trying to figure out how to have a job. And you have to almost advocate and talk to and educate your coworkers to say, okay, if I don't show up for work tomorrow, I'm not being a jerk, something happened, and then they know. And it's a lot easier when everyone is educated about everything. And so lastly, I kind of just wanted to, I guess, talk about Allison's role and others, I guess you were only a little bit, but the genetics team's role in my life. They have been supportive and have been able to help me make medical decisions and educate me so that I can make the decision in a way that will help me, give me information in new diagnoses or testing options. They're, totally, they can get you anything that you need. They're a friend. She was able to, at my appointments, just sit down and say, okay, what are you doing outside of this hospital and, school? What do you do for fun? And kind of encouraged me to not just make the diagnosis, who I am, and encouraged me to get out there and do other things. And then, the self-advocacy was key. They were a huge part in teaching me how to speak up for myself and The shoulder surgery, I wouldn't have gotten that fixed if I hadn't been able to kind of advocate for myself. Medication choices, procedure choices, what you do and don't want are key. And new doctors now, I'm learning I have to educate them and advocate for myself as well. And then, just finding joy in life outside of all of the medical things, I think is probably the most important. I've always been happy, but I don't take anything for granted now. I don't take for granted putting my hair in a ponytail or, taking a walk on the beach. It's all kind of puts everything in perspective. And after the diagnosis, I figured, I had been on Google all the time trying to figure out what I had and who, if anybody else, had it. And so I put a Facebook page out there, and 6 months went by, nothing, forgot I did it. And then all of a sudden I got a ping, and there's a mom that was like, oh my gosh, my son is 6 months old, he's not holding his head up, what do I do? And he just got this diagnosis, and I was able to say, oh yeah, me too. And that, for her, she was like, okay, I get the chills, but he was gonna be okay. And then, a couple months later, kind of where I was, figured it out and was holding his head up. And now we've got 6 families. And just a couple weeks ago, the one just started walking, and same thing, the daughter was 4, and she was just so scared that this wouldn't be a thing. And I was like, patience, we're a little slow in the beginning, and then she did it, and it was kind of the best feeling in the world. So I think being able to advocate for yourself and learning and using your genetic counselor as a resource to be able to do things like that is absolutely key. So I think that's it for now. If I can wrap that up and stop talking. Do we have any questions? Sure.
So the big question is, how did mama let go? Because that's the hard thing, because a lot of times you're in the office and you assume that your kid's listening, and there becomes this unspoken
We're probably
relationship. So where's mama in this now? Because
Mom is right there. It took about 50, no, I'm sorry. She's on the live stream. She took about 50 texts of, okay, what time is your session? Where are you gonna be? What are you doing? What are you gonna wear? Okay, where's the link again? So she's in there. I can say, hi, Mom. She was very good at, trying to normalize my life, and I never truly felt like I guess I knew my limitations. My shoulders would dislocate if I was on the monkey bars. That was something I just kind of knew and got over it. But in general, she normalized everything for me and, pushed me to do something outside of school. So I was in the orchestra. And she pushed me to go away to school as much as she didn't want to. She didn't let go totally. I don't think you ever can. When you have a child with special needs, she's always gonna worry. And I don't know. She's a mom, yeah. She's a good mom. Go ahead. Oh.
Can we turn this microphone on? It is on, okay.
There you go.
One of the other things, as from the clinician side, is that I don't let my teenagers or young adults not talk to me. I tell their parents, I want to talk with your child, and I want to learn everything I can from them, and you'll have an opportunity afterwards to fill in the blanks, but right now they need to know this, and they need to answer these questions, because what happens if they end up in the emergency room without you for an unrelated reason? They need to be able to advocate. So I am extremely aggressive probably about that with my patients that I see every single year and have these ongoing relationships with, because I want them to understand their medical condition, and I want them to be able to do what Melissa is doing, which is advocate for yourself. I can't hold your hand. Mom can't hold your hand. You need to do this.
I was wondering, does your organization deal with young adults in their 20s that deal with emotional problems from all the baggage from having a rare disease? Can they call and talk to? We've had counseling for our son, but it's coming from someone who has no idea what this is about or what they go through.
I think you can talk. So as a genetic counselor, I don't provide like mental health or psychological counseling, but I work very closely with social workers, clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, helping them understand what the condition is. So there's actually a social worker at Lurie, my institution, that sees a number of my patients with a specific disorder, and we have an ongoing conversation. We're always talking about this condition and some of the interesting little details about it that she feels like she needs to know to provide appropriate care and understand where this patient is coming from medically. But I don't, that's not my role, and I'm happy to say that's not my role, and I'm very thankful for all of the mental health professionals that I work with.
Mm-hmm. And I guess I would also say try to see if you can connect him with any kind of a peer group, because sometimes the social workers are awesome, and I've spoken with them before. But I'm actually, as she mentioned, the Peerwise and Parentwise program that Lurie Children's has. I'm a Peerwise mentor, and so I do a lot of the spinal fusion kids that I get a patient and can talk to them about anything that they want. Do they want to talk about the surgery? Do they want to talk about that they're mad they can't play soccer for a couple months? I think it seems to me that talking with somebody that's maybe more their age and definitely that has gone through something that they have, even if it's not exactly the same surgery or the same disease, I feel like that helps them a lot to feel like they're not alone. I mean, even I'm gonna be 26 and having this little Facebook group where there's there's only 2 that are older or my age, but even having these parents that can say, oh, look, my child is having these issues or is accomplishing these things, and it was like, oh yeah, me too. There's something about that, I guess, being able to relate to someone else that could help a lot too. Oh,
I actually just wanted to say thank you for giving us this information, because my genetic counselor, the first time that I had cancer, she said you could have genetic testing done, but you don't have to. She didn't tell me that it might affect my treatment decisions. I found out after I started treatment that I had Lee-Fraumeni syndrome. And that means that I have a predisposition to cancers of all kinds. That means I should not have radiation.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that until after I had already started treatment. And then I never heard from her again. She thought it was very exciting that she had dealt with her first Lee-Fraumeni syndrome patient, but that was all I was to her. And then she moved on, and I don't even have contact with her anymore. So there is no way for me to even connect with a genetic counselor any longer.
I'm very sorry that was your experience.
But it's good to know that genetic counselors can be this involved in the process, and should be.
I like to be this involved. I will say that this is what I enjoy about genetic counseling, is the ongoing relationship. And I like when families email me photos of their child's birthday and those types of things. I mean, that just makes my day. I would recommend, if you have any questions, now you're an expert on Lee-Fraumeni, but don't hesitate to reach out to a different cancer genetic counselor, especially one who might specialize in Lee-Fraumeni or be active in support groups, because I'm sure there are some, because they will probably have a very different perspective.
Allison, we do have a question on the app. It says, if you can't get testing or can't afford it, how accurate and detailed could something like 23andMe be? Are there ways to take those results to a doctor or a way to analyze them deeper? Also, what do you think of things like 23andMe?
That's a very difficult question. 23andMe is not a clinical test. I mean, it does now provide some clinical information. The FDA did approve them for certain types of things. And I think if that's something that you're interested in knowing, go ahead and do it. And you can definitely bring it to your healthcare provider. I have a hard time integrating that information often into healthcare because it's not a black and white test. I mean, no genetic test is, but it's quite variable in what it tells you, and it's hard to apply it to your healthcare. But I think that test will be changing, and that company will be expanding just as other genetic tests are, and it may in the future provide more concrete information. But I would say if you have it, definitely bring it to your appointment and discuss it with your care providers. I'm sorry, it's hard to comment on that. I apologize.
Oh, we got 2 more.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your story from a patient perspective. I think my question is, our son's stuff is so rare, and I share a lot about him because I want people, if like we found them and we found 7 other families. So I'm always worried, like, how much is too much for me as a parent to share when I'm trying to like find him help and also connect with other people. I always worry, like, is there a fine line? Is there anything that you felt that people shared about you that you wish they hadn't as far as your diagnosis goes?
That could be dependent on the person, I guess. I'm kind of an open book, and I mean, I'm up here yelling it to the world, but there are some patients that kind of don't want anyone to even know and just want to, live as a normal life as they can without even saying, okay, I have this thing, this is what it means. I think you'd have to maybe ask him and see what he's comfortable with. But on the other side, just from my opinion, I guess, it's awesome to be advocating and sharing and educating other people, because you never know who else would see what you are saying and say, okay, maybe, this is also what my child has, or I don't know, I feel like it's a good thing to share the information and try to advocate as much as you can, but I think you may just want to ask and
He's
see
nonverbal.
Okay.
And like in long
Yeah.
term, a lot of the kids that have what he has don't really have much
Okay.
language. So I'm like always worried, like, am I oversharing? Am I not sharing enough? But I feel like, in my opinion, if I can help one person,
Yes.
that's what matters.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate hearing your perspective.
Oh, yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
First of all, share away, Mama. That's how we're here, and we get to help everybody else. So thank you for speaking up today. And I just want to ask what your diagnosis is.
Yeah, so it's FKBP14 related Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So Ehlers-Danlos in general is like a connective tissue disorder that can impact everything, anything that's like a tissue, a muscle, so your eyes, your hearing. My type specifically kind of combines 2 of the existing Ehlers-Danlos types that involves scoliosis and vascular issues as well. So pretty much, I mean, it's still weird for me seeing all these other families that I finally am seeing someone else that's like me, which is weird. But we all are born very low muscle tone. And so most of us didn't lift our head up by ourselves until we were about 8 months old. I didn't learn to walk until I was 3 or 4. Same with that little girl that just started. And then, I mean, after that, I don't feel like it, I guess that's probably wrong to say, but I don't feel like it impacted my life as much then, because I mean, I had all these doctor's appointments and things, but then still, went to school and did things my mom probably wouldn't have approved of, or my doctors wouldn't have, but it's still, you were able to kind of live past the diagnosis.
So we have time maybe for one more question, or? All right, well, thank you, Allison and Melissa, for sharing your knowledge and into working with a genetic counselor. At this time, if you can all jump on your mobile app and take the survey about this particular session. Oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry, we forgot about this slide. If anyone would like to read Melissa's essay that she wrote last year in nomination for the Code Tucker Award, it's available on the Genome Magazine website. And this is also where you can nominate your genetic counselor if you have one and have enjoyed working with them. And you can write an essay and share your story and potentially read it to thousands of genetic counselors next year. So that's just our picture from the award ceremony last year. And special thank you to Global Genes and Maureen for inviting us here today to share a little bit more about our journey together.
So just a quick reminder to take the survey on the app, and then obviously now it's time for lunch, and that will be at the lawn and the pavilion, and it's sponsored by Shire. So thank you very much.